What if the greatest illusion of our age is not that we have mastered electricity, but that we were the first to tame it? Picture the world around you. The hum of a refrigerator in the dead of night, the flickering glow of a screen reflecting in your eyes, the endless arteries of light stretching across continents, visible even from the void of space. Electricity is not simply a tool, it is the hidden lifeblood of modern civilization. Without it, the very fabric of our lives would unravel within hours. Silence would fall across cities. Darkness would swallow the night. Machines that sustain us would wheeze to a halt. Humanity would be thrust backward into a world of candles and chaos. This is our ordinary world, the present we take for granted. And yet, there are shadows that whisper that our dominion over this invisible force may not be so uniquely modern after all. That somewhere in the deep past, in a time we label primitive, someone else may have kindled the same spark. The camera moves from the electric veins of a storm-lit skyline, lightning tearing through the heavens, to a quiet ruin outside Baghdad. A sun-bleached horizon, dust swirling across forgotten stones. Here, in a land often described as the cradle of civilization, lies an artifact so unassuming that most would pass it by. A clay jar, no larger than a handspan. Yet inside this vessel, sealed within its brittle walls, lies a riddle that gnaws at the certainty of history. A copper cylinder, an iron rod. Corrosion that hints at acid long vanished. An arrangement that should not exist, yet does. To the modern eye, it is familiar. Too familiar. A shape echoing the design of something every schoolchild knows, yet in a context that defies explanation, the so-called Baghdad Battery. But pause for a moment. If this vessel truly functioned as a source of power, then history itself bends under the weight of its implications. We are told that the mastery of electricity belongs to the Enlightenment, to the brilliance of men like Volta, Galvani, and Franklin. But what if the first spark was struck not in the 18th century Europe, but 2,000 years earlier in the deserts of Mesopotamia? What if the ancients knew what we forgot? This is the fracture line in our story, the unsettling dissonance between what we believe and what might be. Electricity defines the modern world. It fuels our science, our technology, our dominance over nature itself. Yet here, in the dust of Iraq, lurks a possibility that rewrites the story of progress. Consider what electricity means to us today. A child is born in a hospital where machines breathe life into fragile lungs. Satellites orbit above, beaming signals that bind billions in an invisible web of data. Artificial suns, fusion experiments, try to recreate the primordial fires of the universe itself. This is the throne we have built atop the currents that flow unseen. But what if the foundation of that throne is not as secure as we believe? Imagine a world where linear progress is a myth, where knowledge is not accumulated in a steady climb, but discovered, lost, and rediscovered, like driftwood tossed by the tides of time. What if the ancients did not simply dream of gods and myths, but harness the same forces we revere today, only to have them vanish into sand and silence? The Baghdad Battery is not just a jar. It is a crack in the mirror of history, a haunting possibility that compels us to question the arrogance of modernity. Scholars dismiss it as coincidence. Skeptics insist it was nothing more than a vessel for sacred scrolls, or perhaps a container for incense, an object with no greater purpose than ritual. But others, quiet voices on the fringes of archaeology, dare to wonder. Could this unassuming artifact be evidence of a civilization whose understanding of the natural world rivaled our own? The thought is intoxicating, dangerous, because if true, it dismantles the narrative of human advancement as we know it. Electricity is not magic. It is a force governed by laws, laws that existed long before our species ever learned to give them names. Lightning cracked over Mesopotamia as surely as it does today. Amber rubbed with fur sparked with static in the hands of the ancients as it does in ours. The laws were always there. The question is, did they know how to harness them? The image lingers, a clay jar shattered at its rim, silent in its museum case. Around it, the neon glow of the modern world pulses like a heartbeat. Two eras colliding in a single haunting symbol. Could this jar have powered a ritual in a temple, plating idols with a divine sheen of gold? Could it have carried a spark meant not for machines, but for gods? Or is it simply an illusion, a story we tell ourselves because we hunger for mysteries greater than our own time can provide? The question festers, unresolved. As the lights of our civilization blaze brighter than ever, we must confront a possibility that chills the spine. That 2,000 years ago, another spark was struck, its glow extinguished, leaving behind only fragments for us to puzzle over. If true, then the arc of human progress is not an arrow, it is a circle, endlessly repeating discoveries in forgotten cycles. The storm fades, the ruins remain, and the clay jar waits, as it has for millennia, daring us to decide what it truly is. But what if this vessel, so ordinary in appearance, was anything but? What if it was, in truth, a key? And if it was a key, then what door did it open? The year was 1936. The world was trembling on the edge of upheaval as shadows gathered across Europe and whispers of war grew louder. Yet in the dust and heat of Iraq, far from the political thunderclouds, another discovery was quietly waiting. An enigma buried in silence, destined to rattle the foundations of history. On the outskirts of Baghdad, in the ruins of what was once the Parthian capital, a German archaeologist named Wilhelm König brushed away centuries of dirt to uncover a small, unremarkable object. It was no jewel-encrusted crown, no towering statue, no glittering treasure that would catch the eye of kings. Instead, it was a clay jar 9 inches tall, sealed at the top, its surface weathered and unassuming. The kind of artifact a museum might pass over as an ordinary vessel, one among countless thousands. But inside this vessel lay a puzzle that refused to be ordinary. The jar contained a copper cylinder, carefully rolled and sealed with bitumen. Resting at its center, insulated by asphalt, was an iron rod. It was a design too deliberate to be dismissed as chance. Corrosion scars suggested contact with some acidic liquid, perhaps vinegar, wine, or lemon juice. König examined it with the practiced eye of an archaeologist, but what he saw transcended pottery and metallurgy. He saw echoes of something far more modern. What he held, in essence, resembled a galvanic cell, a battery. The realization struck him like lightning. Could it be that the people of the Parthian Empire, living 2 millennia before the scientific revolutions of Europe, had harnessed electricity? Could this unassuming jar be proof that the ancients knew how to generate and perhaps even use electrical power? It was a question both exhilarating and terrifying. Imagine the scene: König, sweating under the Iraqi sun, holding the object in his hands, its ancient clay crumbling slightly at the edges. He was surrounded not by laboratories and wires, but by sand, stone, and ruins. And yet, within this jar, he sensed the ghost of a spark, a hum that should not belong to this place this time, a technological whisper echoing out of antiquity. The ordinary world of archaeology, of classifying shards, cataloguing fragments, arranging artifacts into tidy cultural timelines, was shattered. This was no ordinary relic. It was an intruder, a trespasser from another age of knowledge. The call to adventure had sounded. König's bold hypothesis would shake the academic world. The jar was an ancient battery. If filled with an acidic solution, the combination of copper and iron could produce a small but measurable electric current. Modern replicas would confirm this possibility decades later. Yet in 1936, his proposal was nothing short of heresy. But think for a moment of the implications. A battery is not a toy. It is a tool, a device with purpose, and purpose implies use. If the ancients had built such cells, then what did they do with them? To gild jewelry, to shock patients in a kind of primitive electrotherapy, to awe the faithful with sparks in religious rituals. The clay jar remained mute, but the questions it posed were deafening. The discovery of the Baghdad Battery was not simply the unearthing of an artifact. It was the unearthing of doubt, a rupture in the comfortable narrative of human progress. Because if electricity had been discovered, lost and rediscovered, then history itself was not a line, it was a loop, an Ouroboros swallowing its own tail. The story of invention, we are told, is one of steady ascent. From fire to wheels, wheels to steam, steam to wires, wires to silicon. But what if the ladder is not straight? What if, hidden in the sands of Mesopotamia, there was a rung we missed? The jar seemed to whisper of forgotten genius. Picture the Parthian Empire, often dismissed as a shadow between greater empires, its legacy reduced to footnotes. Yet within its boundaries stood Ctesiphon, a city of towering arches and vast palaces. Merchants traveled the Silk Road carrying silk, spices and secrets between east and west. Could it be that within these thriving metropolises, artisans experimented not just with metals and dyes, but with the invisible currents of nature itself? Koenig dared to ask. In 1940 he published his findings, suggesting that the jar might have been used for electroplating, coating objects in a thin layer of precious metal using electricity. It was an extraordinary claim, and like all extraordinary claims, it was met with skepticism, derision, and silence. But the idea had been planted. The genie could not be forced back into the jar. The call to adventure does not ask politely. It rips at the fabric of certainty, forcing us to step beyond what is safe into the unknown. For Koenig, the clay jar was not simply a relic. It was a summons, a beckoning from history itself to descend into the shadows of forgotten knowledge. And for us, the audience in the present, the call is no less urgent. What if we are not the pinnacle of human discovery? What if electricity was not born in our laboratories but reborn? The camera lingers on Koenig's jar, its cracked rim framed in shadow. A faint whisper of thunder rumbles across the desert sky. The modern world flickers in montage, neon signs, power stations, lightning striking skyscrapers, then back again to the jar. 2,000 years separate them, and yet they are connected by the same question. Who first commanded the spark? The artifact has survived conquests, empires and centuries of silence to deliver us this challenge. Do we listen? Or do we turn away, content to let history remain untroubled? The call to adventure demands an answer. But for every call, there is resistance. For every revelation, a refusal. And so the story turns toward the iron grip of skepticism, those who would bury the spark as surely as it was once entombed in clay. Every great mystery comes wrapped in resistance. For each artifact that whispers of forgotten truths, there is a chorus that insists on silence. The Baghdad Battery is no exception. From the moment Wilhelm Koenig dared to publish his startling hypothesis that the clay jar, copper cylinder, and iron rod constituted an ancient galvanic cell, academia tightened its grip on orthodoxy. To acknowledge such a claim would be to fracture the carefully constructed timeline of technological progress, a narrative where electricity is the crown jewel of modernity. To admit the possibility that Mesopotamian hands harnessed current 2,000 years ago would mean rewriting entire chapters of history, and history does not surrender its authority lightly. In the years following Koenig's proposal, critics rushed to explain away the enigma. The jar, they argued, was nothing more than a storage vessel, perhaps for scrolls, sacred texts rolled tightly within the copper tube, preserved by bitumen against the ravages of time. Others claimed it was an incense container, an object of ritual rather than science. Still others dismissed Koenig's electroplating theory as fantasy, a projection of modern obsession onto ancient simplicity. The objections were practical, almost brutally so. Where were the wires? Where was the infrastructure? A single jar may create a flicker of voltage, but what of the network, the circuits, the devices to make it meaningful? Without context, they insisted, the jar was nothing but clay and conjecture. Skepticism grew heavier than the artifact itself, burying it not in soil, but in doubt. The jar was relegated to the shelves of the National Museum of Iraq in Baghdad, a curiosity without category, exiled from serious consideration. To many scholars, it was nothing more than an archaeological anomaly, interesting perhaps, but irrelevant. Yet this dismissal carries with it a deeper question. Why do we so fiercely resist rewriting the past? The human mind craves order, certainty, the comforting line of progress leading from ignorance to enlightenment. To suggest that knowledge might have flared and vanished before our time unsettles that order. It forces us to confront the possibility that we are not as unique, not as advanced, not as inevitable as we believe. This is the iron grip of skepticism, not simply doubt in evidence, but fear of consequence. Picture the artifact again. The small clay jar, quietly corroding in its glass case, stripped of significance by the voices of dismissal. Its story, so bold in Koenig's hands, reduced to whispers and footnotes. Imagine standing before it, as generations of visitors have, unaware of the storm of controversy hidden within its cracked rim. To them, it is a jar among countless others. To scholars, it is a test of belief. To skeptics, it is an embarrassment, better forgotten than reimagined. But in this refusal lies another mystery. Skepticism itself becomes part of the story. Why such urgency to bury the idea? Why such force to smother the possibility? Perhaps because deep down even the skeptics know that the jar is not so easily explained away, for experiments have already betrayed their resistance. Replicas constructed with the same materials produce measurable current, 0.5 volt here, 2 volts there, enough to shock the tongue, enough to deposit a thin layer of silver or gold, enough to prove that, whether or not the ancients intended it, the jar could indeed function as a battery. And so the artifact lingers in a liminal state, caught between belief and denial, fact and fantasy. It is a Schrödinger's relic, alive with potential and dead with dismissal, depending on who dares to open the box of interpretation. But skepticism is not the end of the story. It is only the resistance before the breakthrough, the darkness before the dawn. For as much as critics fought to contain the Baghdad Battery within the boundaries of dismissal, others continued to probe, to test, to wonder. And in the shadows of skepticism, experiments began to whisper back. Imagine a darkened laboratory in the mid-20th century, a replica jar filled with vinegar, wires attached, a faint flicker on a voltmeter, the needle trembles, electricity, primitive, faint but undeniable, flows. Skepticism cannot erase what the current proves, and so we arrive at the paradox. The Baghdad Battery exists and it works. The question is not, could it produce electricity? The answer to that is yes. The true question, the one that keeps historians awake at night, is why. If the jar was indeed a battery, what did the ancients use it for? Was it science? Was it ritual? Was it an accident, a byproduct of some other craft? Or was it something altogether stranger, a secret purpose now lost to the sands of time? Skepticism holds tight to its iron grip. Without wires, without evidence of use, the artifact remains locked in ambiguity. But ambiguity is not absence, it is possibility. And so we are left with a jar that refuses to stay silent, no matter how tightly the critics press their hands over its mouth. It hums with questions, vibrating in the void between belief and denial. A clay vessel, a copper tube, an iron rod, and the unsettling thought that we may not be the first to hold the spark. Skepticism cannot extinguish that thought, it can only delay it. The image lingers, the jar in its museum case surrounded by shadows dismissed as nothing. Yet in the silence, in the absence of wires, in the void of certainty, another truth emerges. For sometimes the most dangerous knowledge is not what is proven, but what is possible. And as the skeptics turn away, experiments begin again in secret corners. Jars recreated, currents measured, sparks flickering where none should be. The refusal of the call cannot last forever. The story does not end with silence, for soon a mentor will arrive, and with him a vision so bold it will pierce even the iron grip of doubt. In every great journey there comes a moment when doubt threatens to consume the path forward, when voices of resistance grow so loud they risk drowning out the call to discovery. And then, suddenly, inevitably, a figure emerges, a mentor, a visionary, someone who dares to see what others cannot. For the Baghdad Battery, that figure was Wilhelm König. König was no ordinary archaeologist. His path to the desert sands of Iraq was winding, unconventional. Born in Austria, he began not as a scholar of antiquity, but as a railway engineer, a man of mechanics, precision, and practicality. Yet it was precisely this background that made him different. He did not approach relics with the cautious reverence of a traditional academic. He approached them with the curious eyes of an engineer, always asking not only what something was, but what it could do. In 1936, König was working at the National Museum of Iraq, studying artifacts excavated from the Parthian era. It was there, among the dust-coated relics, that his gaze settled on the strange clay jar. At first glance, it was unremarkable, 10 inches tall, capped with asphalt, containing a copper cylinder and an iron rod. Many had dismissed it as some ceremonial vessel, an incense burner, or perhaps a scroll container. But König saw something more. To him, the components were unmistakable: a conductor, an electrolyte chamber, an electrode. He recognized the language of electricity written across its corroded surfaces. In that moment, König did what skeptics feared most. He saw the impossible as possible. 4 years later, in 1940, König published his daring paper. His claim was simple yet staggering. The Baghdad jar was no ordinary vessel. It was a galvanic cell, a primitive battery. 2,000 years before Volta, the ancients of Mesopotamia had captured lightning in clay. The scientific world reeled. To many, the proposal seemed reckless, a violation of chronology. Electricity, after all, was supposed to be the treasure of modernity, wrestled from nature only in the last few centuries. Volta's pile, Franklin's kite, Faraday's coils, this was the established lineage. To suggest that a Parthian artisan had stumbled upon the same force was to topple centuries of narrative. But König pressed on, undeterred by ridicule. In his paper, he described the electrochemical principles in meticulous detail. The copper cylinder, he argued, would act as the cathode, while the iron rod served as the anode. An acidic or alkaline liquid, vinegar, lemon juice, or grape juice, poured into the jar could serve as the electrolyte. The result? A small but measurable flow of current. This was no guesswork. It was grounded in science. The principles were clear, the components undeniable. In König's vision, the jar was not a curiosity but a conduit, a device that could have been used for electroplating, for medical therapy, or perhaps even for rituals shrouded in secrecy. Here, for the first time, the Baghdad Battery was not simply an object. It was a possibility. To imagine electricity flowing through ancient Iraq is to reimagine history itself. Imagine a Parthian craftsman dipping a silver ornament into a solution, attaching it to the copper tube, and watching as a golden sheen slowly formed under a faint but steady current. Or envision a priest in a temple holding a jar that could deliver a mild shock, interpreted not as science, but as divine power. The lines between technology and mysticism blur, leaving us with unsettling questions. If König was right, then history was wrong. But this was not merely a battle of ideas. It was a battle of vision. The skeptics could only see a jar. König saw a circuit. They saw inert clay. He saw potential energy. His engineering mind became the mentor's gift, guiding us into a new way of looking at the past. For König, the Baghdad Battery was not an anomaly to be dismissed. It was a doorway, a threshold. And in every hero's journey, crossing that threshold changes everything. Koenig's vision forced others to confront the artifact with new eyes. Replicas were constructed, experiments were performed, and though the results would later fuel debates, they all echoed a haunting truth. The jar could function as a battery. Whether by design or accident, the possibility existed. This is the essence of a mentor, not to deliver certainty, but to illuminate possibility, to suggest that what we thought we knew may not be the whole story. But Koenig himself remained a tragic figure, a visionary whose ideas would outlive his reputation. His paper was largely ignored during his lifetime, dismissed by mainstream academia. Yet his legacy endured, carried forward by those who dared to continue the experiments. His vision had planted the seed. There is something profoundly human in Koenig's role. He reminds us that progress often comes not from those who conform, but from those willing to risk ridicule for revelation. He saw sparks in clay where others saw nothing at all, and for that, he became the mentor we needed, guiding us into the deeper caves of history's mystery. Still, a question lingers in the shadows. If electricity did indeed flow through ancient Mesopotamia, who wielded it, and for what purpose? Was it science before its time, ritual disguised as technology, or something altogether stranger? The mentor has lit the torch. The path is before us. But the cave we are about to enter is darker than ever, filled with tests, trials, and contradictions. For the Baghdad Battery, as with all great mysteries, the vision of a single man was not enough. To prove its power, we would need to cross the threshold and confront the secrets buried in its current. There is a moment in every journey where imagination yields to proof, where the line between possibility and reality must be tested. For the Baghdad Battery, that moment came not in the ruins of Mesopotamia, but in the controlled silence of modern laboratories. The threshold had been crossed. If Koenig's hypothesis was to endure, the jar could not remain a symbol. It had to become a circuit. It had to prove, under the unforgiving light of experimentation, that clay, copper, and iron could indeed whisper with current. And so, replicas were made. In the late 20th century, archaeologists and scientists began recreating the strange Parthian artifact with painstaking accuracy. Clay jars were molded, copper cylinders rolled, iron rods placed at their center. The joints were sealed with bitumen just as the ancients had done. Then came the test. The jars were filled with acidic solutions, vinegar, lemon juice or grape juice, substances readily available in antiquity. Wires were attached, voltmeters were poised. And the results? The needle trembled. A faint spark of electricity, no stronger than the current of a child's science kit, but undeniable nonetheless. Half a volt, sometimes a volt, at times even two. It was not power as we know it, no glowing bulbs, no roaring engines, but it was enough to plate a sliver of metal with gold, enough to shock the tongue with a metallic sting, enough to prove that the principle was sound. Electricity flowed where history said it should not. The air in the lab was heavy with revelation. Scientists who had laughed at the notion of an ancient battery now held in their hands a jar that behaved as Koenig had predicted. The clay vessel, once dismissed as a curiosity, had crossed the threshold into possibility. But possibility is not proof. Voltage alone does not tell us purpose. A spark is not a story. And here lies the tension. The Baghdad Battery works, but why? The replicas revealed currents measurable and real, yet they left the question of intent unresolved. Did the ancients design the jar to produce electricity, or is it merely coincidence, an accident of construction mistaken for design? This is the haunting power of the artifact, to stand at the threshold of reality and myth, to blur the line between science and speculation. Imagine for a moment that it was deliberate. Picture a workshop in ancient Mesopotamia. An artisan lowers a small object, perhaps a bronze pendant, into a solution, then connects it to a copper tube inside a clay jar. Hours later, he withdraws it, now gleaming with a thin sheen of gold. To the uninitiated, it would seem divine. To the initiated, it would be craft. In either case, the result would be indistinguishable from magic. But there are other possibilities, darker still. What if the jar was used in ritual? Imagine a priest cloaked in incense smoke, holding the vessel before awed followers. A hidden wire, a concealed conductor. A brief touch delivers a sting, a spark. The crowd recoils in awe. To them, it is not electricity. It is divinity, a god's touch, channeled through clay. The threshold of science and superstition narrows to a razor's edge. Modern experiments could not decide between these narratives. They could only confirm one thing. The Baghdad Battery was no fraud. It was not inert. Whether by accident or intention, it could conduct the invisible force that shapes our world. And so, the story deepened. The artifact had crossed from obscurity into controversy. Every vault measured was both an affirmation and an accusation. Affirmation that Koenig had seen what was truly there. Accusation that history had overlooked or deliberately buried the truth. But in this revelation lurks a deeper unease, because if one jar could do it, what of many? Experiments soon revealed that linking multiple replicas in series could amplify the current. 10 jars together, 20, each adding a fraction of a volt, could produce a spark powerful enough to be seen, to be felt. The thought was staggering. Was it possible that the ancients not only built one, but many? That somewhere in the sands lay the remains of forgotten circuits, arrays of clay batteries linked in silence? The threshold had become a doorway. Crossing it raises questions not just of science, but of philosophy. For if the Baghdad Battery represents ancient knowledge deliberately applied, then history is no longer a straight line of progress. It is a fractured mirror, pieces scattered across time waiting for us to assemble them. What else have we overlooked? What else lies buried, mistaken for the mundane? The laboratory fades. The replica jars sit on a table, their voltmeters silent now, their purpose suspended in ambiguity. The experiment has proven enough to haunt us, but not enough to silence doubt. The spark is real, but the story remains untold. Electricity is a paradox, invisible yet undeniable. And the Baghdad Battery mirrors that paradox perfectly, present, real, measurable, yet cloaked in uncertainty. The ancients may have known its power, or they may not. But the fact remains, the spark exists, whether by design or by accident. This is the crossing of the threshold, the moment when possibility refuses to return to myth, when a story steps forward into the realm of haunting reality. And yet, on the far side of that threshold, questions multiply. If the jars worked, why are there so few? If the ancients knew, why is there no record? If electricity once flickered in Mesopotamian hands, why did its flame go out? The jar has spoken, but only in whispers. The current flows, but the purpose remains hidden. And so we are left at the edge of mystery, one foot in science, the other in shadow. The threshold has been crossed, the spark is alive, but sparks demand fuel. Sparks demand circuits. Sparks demand use. And so the question remains, echoing across centuries, if voltage lurks in ancient clay, what else lies buried in the sands of Mesopotamia? No journey into the unknown is undertaken alone. The Baghdad Battery, once dismissed as a solitary curiosity, began to gather allies, scientists, archaeologists, historians, drawn to the spark of possibility it embodied. As skepticism's grip tightened, voices rose in defiance, determined to test, probe, and illuminate. In the darkness of doubt, allies are the torches that keep the path alive. The first allies were experimenters, men and women of science intrigued by Koenig's hypothesis. They did not see clay and copper as relics, but as challenges. Could this simple artifact truly yield electricity? And if so, could it reveal a forgotten chapter of human ingenuity? One by one, they built their replicas. Some in university laboratories, others in private workshops, lit only by the glow of voltmeters and the hiss of chemical solutions. Clay jars molded to the same dimensions as the Parthian artifact. Copper sheets rolled into cylinders, iron rods carefully placed at the center, acids poured in, vinegar, lemon juice, even grape juice. The electrodes tingled with corrosion. The meters shivered. And once again, electricity flowed. Half a volt, 2 volts, not enough to power a bulb or drive a motor, but enough to prove a principle, enough to show that in the right hands, this relic could indeed serve as a battery. The Allies grew bolder. Some linked jars together in series, amplifying the current. With 10 jars connected, sparks leapt across small gaps, primitive yet undeniable. The Baghdad Battery was no longer a relic entombed in glass. It had become a living experiment, its potential rediscovered in the modern age. Yet the alliance did not stop with scientists. Archaeologists too began to take notice. Other artifacts emerged, similar jars uncovered in Seleucia, in Ctesiphon, remnants of civilizations that once flourished along the Tigris and Euphrates. Their resemblance to Koenig's jar was uncanny. The implication was startling. The Baghdad Battery was not alone. It was part of a family, a tradition, perhaps even a technology. Here lay the beginnings of a network, not a single spark but many. Supporters pointed to corrosion patterns on copper cylinders, hinting at exposure to acidic solutions. They noted parallels in Mesopotamian craftsmanship, advanced metalwork, intricate gilding, knowledge of chemistry hidden within ritual practices. The evidence mounted, not as a roar but as a steady murmur, eroding the wall of skepticism one grain at a time. Historians, sympathetic to Koenig's vision, added their voices, challenging the narrative of linear progress. They asked why we assumed the ancients were incapable of discovery. After all, were not the pyramids aligned with astronomical precision? Did not the Sumerians chart the stars with staggering accuracy? If they could map the heavens, why not harness the spark hidden in clay? But allies are not without friction. For every experiment that confirmed Koenig's vision, critics fired back with counter-arguments. If these jars were truly batteries, why are there no wires, no written records, no explicit depictions of their use? To skeptics, the absence of context was fatal. To allies, it was the very essence of mystery. The debates grew heated, often unfolding in dimly lit archives and at conferences where voices echoed in lecture halls. Allies invoked the power of replication, the undeniable flow of current. Skeptics clung to the void of evidence. Back and forth, the jar became less an artifact than a battleground, a silent object onto which each side projected their fears, their hopes, their visions of history. Yet in the tension lay transformation. For with every test, every replication, every discovery of a similar jar, the Baghdad Battery drew more attention. Its shadow lengthened, spreading from Baghdad to universities across the globe. What began as Koenig's solitary vision was now a shared quest. Picture a dimly lit room, jars lined up on a wooden table, wires linking them together, voltmeters flickering in the dark. A scientist leans close, eyes widening as a tiny arc of electricity leaps between two electrodes. In that moment, time collapses. 2,000 years vanish. The ancient jar is no longer silent, it speaks in the universal language of current. But not all allies sought scientific truth alone. Some pursued the mystical. They saw in the Baghdad Battery not only a tool of craftsmanship, but a relic of ritual. What if these jars were not used to gild trinkets, but to summon the divine, to deliver shocks interpreted as sacred power, to awaken a sense of awe in followers standing before priests cloaked in smoke and secrecy? In this interpretation, the battery was not technology, it was theater, ritual electricity, a stage trick elevated to divinity. And in a world where gods ruled, perhaps that distinction was meaningless. Thus the Allies diverged. Some sought the scientific application, others the mystical. But all agreed on one thing. The Baghdad Battery could not be dismissed. It demanded explanation. The coalition of believers, scientists, archaeologists, and visionaries carried the torch into the darkness. But with every step, the shadows deepened. For to suggest that ancient Mesopotamia wielded electricity is to invite darker questions. If they had the spark, why is it gone? If they harnessed the current, why is history silent? Did the knowledge vanish in conquest? Was it guarded as a secret too dangerous to share? Or was it erased, deliberately buried beneath the sands of time? The Allies pressed forward, determined to uncover answers. They gathered evidence, conducted tests, wrote papers. The Baghdad Battery had become more than a relic. It was now a symbol of forgotten ingenuity, a rallying point for those who dared to challenge orthodoxy. But even allies cannot silence the void. For as their voices grew stronger, so too did the shadow at the heart of the mystery, the absence of definitive proof. The jar works, but to what end? The Allies march onward, their torches casting long shadows across the ruins. They are closer than ever to the heart of the enigma. But ahead lies the inmost cave, where speculation darkens into something more unsettling. The possibility that electricity in antiquity was not used for progress, but for power of another kind. For what if the Baghdad Battery was not a tool of science at all, but a relic of ritualistic shadows? Every journey into mystery eventually draws us toward a darker chamber, the inmost cave where speculation sharpens into confrontation. For the Baghdad Battery, this descent leads us not into modern laboratories or skeptical archives, but into the living world of Mesopotamia itself. To understand whether the ancients harnessed electricity, we must immerse ourselves in their mastery, their science, their ritual, their unseen relationship with the natural forces that surrounded them. Mesopotamia. The very name means the land between rivers. Here the Tigris and Euphrates carved fertile lifelines into otherwise unforgiving terrain, birthing the earliest civilizations we know. The cradle of writing, the seat of kings, the home of myth and mathematics. The region was never primitive. It was a forge of innovation. Under the shadow of its great ziggurats, civilizations rose that rivaled anything Europe would achieve for another 2,000 years. Towering temples aligned with the stars, laws codified in stone, architecture that defied the limits of mud brick. And metallurgy, the crafting of copper, bronze, silver, and gold, practiced with astonishing skill. It is here, in this nexus of artistry and science, that the Baghdad Battery begins to make a different kind of sense. Consider the Parthians, who occupied this land around the time the jar was crafted. Though often overshadowed by Rome, their empire stretched across trade routes that bound east to west. Their artisans worked with precious metals. Their physicians experimented with remedies. Their priests wove rituals that blended science with divinity. This was not a society of ignorance. It was a world brimming with curiosity. Could such a culture, steeped in mastery of materials, stumble upon the galvanic principle? Could they have discovered that copper and iron, bathed in acidic solution, could produce an invisible force? The evidence whispers, yes. We know that Mesopotamian metallurgists could gild jewelry with stunning precision. Gold and silver leaf was applied to objects, but electroplating, the process of binding metals using electrical current, would have given them a different level of finish. Replicas of the Baghdad Battery have shown it is capable of producing exactly that, thin coatings of gold deposited onto other metals. To imagine this in the hands of Parthian craftsmen is to glimpse a lost workshop where science and art fused seamlessly, but electricity's potential may not have ended with metallurgy. Ancient medicine, too, flirted with forces we would call electrical. Consider that even in Greece and Rome, physicians experimented with the shocks of electric fish, pressing torpedo rays against aching joints or migraines. Could Mesopotamian healers, armed with a jar that produced a similar sting, have used it for electrotherapy. To us, it seems primitive. To them, it may have been miraculous. And then there is the realm of mysticism, the domain where science and superstition blur. Imagine a Mesopotamian priest standing before worshippers in the glow of a temple, holding a clay jar concealed beneath flowing robes. A hidden conductor touches a sacred idol, producing a faint spark when the faithful approach. To the crowd, it is the touch of the divine. To the priest, it is a tool of awe. The inmost cave beckons with these possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. If the Baghdad Battery was deliberate, then it was not an accident of pottery. It was a reflection of Mesopotamian mastery, the same mastery that gave us cuneiform writing, the same mastery that charted the heavens with lunar calendars, the same mastery that envisioned gods not as abstractions, but as forces entwined with the cosmos. But here lies the danger. For if the Parthians truly harnessed electricity, they did not leave us blueprints, no treatises carved into tablets, no diagrams etched into clay. Instead, only scattered vessels, corrosion-streaked and ambiguous, left to puzzle us. Why? Perhaps the knowledge was never widespread. Perhaps it was reserved for a small priestly class, a tool of ritual rather than a foundation for science. Or perhaps it was a discovery too fragile, too limited, too tied to circumstance to spread. Electricity, after all, is invisible. Without the infrastructure to channel and amplify it, its potential is fleeting, ephemeral, almost ghostly. The Baghdad Battery sits at the intersection of possibility and oblivion. It could have been a tool of craftsmen, healers, or priests, but in every case it suggests a mastery we are reluctant to acknowledge. Think of it, a civilization that knew the secret of the spark, yet did not turn it into engines or dynamos. A people who touched the edge of modernity, only to vanish back into the sands. The thought is haunting, not because it diminishes them, but because it diminishes us. We tell ourselves that progress is inevitable, that knowledge only grows. Yet here we confront the opposite, that knowledge can be gained, wielded, and lost, leaving only fragments behind. A jar, a cylinder, a rod, the echo of a spark. The camera lingers on a ziggurat under a starlit sky. Torches flicker at its base. Inside, priests chant before idols covered in gleaming metal. Somewhere in the shadows, a jar rests, sealed with bitumen, its acidic contents humming faintly in the dark. Was it science? Was it ritual? Or was it both, inseparable in a world where gods and forces were one? This is Mesopotamian mastery, not only in what they built, but in what they may have concealed. And so, the approach to the inmost cave sharpens into unease, for as we descend further we confront not just ingenuity but absence, not just mastery but mystery. We sense the spark but cannot see the flame, and that absence is a void that pulls us deeper toward the ordeal itself, the confrontation with the possibility that evidence may never be enough, that the spark flickered, then died, leaving us to wonder forever. The inmost cave waits, cloaked in silence. Ahead lies the ordeal, the confrontation with the void of evidence itself. Every great journey reaches its trial by fire, its ordeal, where the hero must confront not the promise of discovery, but the abyss of doubt. For the Baghdad Battery, that ordeal is not a dramatic revelation, not a dazzling proof, but something far colder: silence. For as much as experiments prove that the jar can work, evidence of how, when, or why it was used remains absent. The clay vessel hums with potential, yet history refuses to confirm its story. This is the void, the place where facts falter, and only questions echo. We know what the artifact is made of: clay, copper, iron, bitumen. We know what it can do: produce a trickle of voltage, shock the tongue, plate thin metal. But the why, the purpose, is lost. No Mesopotamian tablet describes its use. No mural depicts its spark. No ancient text whispers of electricity in ritual or craft. The jar remains mute, and in that muteness, skepticism thrives. This is the ordeal, staring into an abyss where knowledge should be. The problem lies not in the object itself, but in its context. Archaeology is not simply the study of artifacts, it is the study of artifacts within their world. A wheel found in isolation could be mistaken for a disc. A gear without a machine is nothing but a curiosity. So too with the Baghdad Battery. Without the wires, without the tools, without the evidence of application, the jar is a fragment of a story we cannot complete. And so, critics return to their refrain. Coincidence, a storage jar, an incense holder, a mistake of interpretation. They point to the absence of supporting evidence as fatal, a silence louder than any spark. To them, the ordeal is final. The artifact has no voice and thus no power. But silence is never simple. Absence does not always mean non-existence. It can mean loss, erasure, secrets too fragile to survive the march of centuries. How many libraries burned? How many tablets crumbled? How many inventions vanished when empires collapsed? History is not a flawless record. It is a battlefield where knowledge is as easily destroyed as it is created. The ordeal forces us to reckon with this uncomfortable truth, that the spark may have existed, but its flame was extinguished, leaving behind only ash. Imagine it. A workshop lost to conquest, its jars shattered, its tools looted, or a priestly secret guarded too well, never written, never shared, passed from mouth to mouth until the chain broke. Knowledge can vanish in an instant. The void of evidence is not proof of absence, it is the scar of history's violence. And yet the void is merciless. It leaves us with no certainty, only fragments, only echoes, only speculation. Modern science adds to the frustration. CT scans of replicas reveal corrosion consistent with acidic solutions. Electrochemical tests show potential voltage, but still the context eludes us. Were these jars experiments, ritual objects, coincidences of construction? The ordeal deepens because science cannot answer philosophy, evidence cannot conjure meaning from silence. And so the Baghdad Battery hangs suspended, a paradox encased in clay. A jar that works, yet may mean nothing. A relic that could rewrite history, yet may never do so. This is the true trial. Not that the artifact is fraudulent, but that it is ambiguous. That it refuses to give us closure. That it taunts us with potential, then vanishes into silence. Philosophically, this ordeal strikes at the core of human arrogance. We believe ourselves masters of progress, climbing steadily from ignorance to enlightenment. But the Baghdad Battery suggests another possibility, that knowledge is fragile, fleeting, that we may not be the first to discover the spark, only the first to record it in books that survived. The void of evidence forces us to confront the terrifying thought that history is not a ladder, it is a labyrinth where light flickers and dies, and the same discoveries must be stumbled upon again and again. The ordeal is not comfortable, it is not reassuring, it leaves us with doubt, with ambiguity, with the haunting suspicion that we will never know. Yet even in the void, revelations stir. For experiments hint at greater potential. When multiple jars are connected, their power increases. Arrays of clay cells linked in series can produce more significant currents, enough to shock visibly, enough to spark. The thought gnaws at us. Was there once more than a single jar? Was there once a chain, a circuit, an array that lit the dark in ways we cannot imagine? The ordeal refuses to yield answers, but it multiplies the questions. And in that multiplication it becomes more than an obstacle, it becomes a crucible. It burns away certainty, leaving only the raw fuel of curiosity. This is the hero's trial, to stand at the edge of absence and not retreat, to endure silence without surrendering to dismissal, to hold the possibility alive even when proof slips through our fingers. The Baghdad Battery is not just an artifact. It is a mirror of our struggle with the unknown. It shows us how fragile our certainties are, how easily the story of progress unravels when confronted with a single anomalous object. The ordeal does not resolve. It lingers, unsettled, unyielding. It asks us to sit in the discomfort of ambiguity. It demands that we face the void without flinching. The camera lingers on the jar once more, its surface cracked, its secret sealed. Around it, silence presses in like a weight. No inscriptions, no wires, no proof. Only the possibility of power, flickering like a ghost, and then a whisper. What if the jar was not meant to stand alone? What if there were others, hidden, lost, or destroyed? What if, in the absence of evidence, we are mistaking silence for emptiness? The ordeal deepens, the void yawns wider. But within that abyss lies the spark of transformation. For even if proof remains elusive, possibility itself is a kind of revelation.
The spark may be lost, but its echo endures. And in that echo lies a reward waiting to be claimed. The ordeal has been faced, the void confronted. The Baghdad Battery remains shrouded in silence, yet the very fact that it refuses to collapse into certainty is itself a kind of revelation. For the true reward is not always proof, it is possibility. And the Baghdad Battery, for all its ambiguity, offers us the spark of something extraordinary. The vision that humanity's relationship with electricity may stretch back far longer than we dare to admit. The reward begins with replication. Time and again, scientists and enthusiasts have reconstructed the clay jar, copper cylinder, and iron rod. They have poured in vinegar, lemon juice, grape juice, even acidic wine. And each time, the results are the same. Electricity flows. Not theory, not speculation, but current, measurable, and real. Imagine the awe of those first modern replicators, watching a thin layer of gold deposit itself onto silver through electroplating, using only a jar of vinegar and a copper tube. Imagine the shiver as a faint spark jumps between electrodes, a phenomenon thought to belong to the modern age now flickering through the design of an ancient artifact. This is not the silence of coincidence, it is the whisper of possibility. From this possibility emerges a panorama of uses. Some are practical. A jar producing a volt or two could electroplate jewelry, ornaments, or religious icons. Mesopotamian craftsmen, already masters of metallurgy, could have used such devices to coat objects in gleaming layers of gold and silver. In a world where the divine was adorned in metal, what greater power than to make the gods shine brighter? Others' uses are medical. Ancient civilizations were not strangers to electricity's strange touch. The Greeks, centuries later, would press electric fish against the temples of patients suffering migraines, using the shocks as therapy. Could Mesopotamian healers, experimenting with clay jars and acidic solutions, have discovered something similar? A tool to numb pain, to treat ailments, to dazzle the sick with a sensation unlike anything they had known. And then there are the ritualistic possibilities. Picture a priest in the shadowed corridors of a temple. The faithful gather before a statue of a god, their eyes reflecting torchlight. The priest touches a hidden wire from the jar to the idol. A spark leaps. The crowd gasps. To them, it is no scientific trick. It is the presence of divinity itself. The gods have spoken through the spark. In such moments, technology and mysticism are indistinguishable, and electricity becomes not a tool, but a miracle. The Baghdad Battery rewards us with this spectrum of possibility, a kaleidoscope of uses that blur the lines between science, art, medicine, and religion. It reminds us that electricity does not need to light cities or drive machines to be powerful. Sometimes the faintest current is enough to change perception, to alter belief, to inspire awe. The reward is not certainty, it is wonder. For in embracing the possibility that the ancients knew electricity, even in rudimentary form, we are forced to reconsider the story of progress. History ceases to be a straight line climbing toward enlightenment. Instead, it becomes a cycle, a series of discoveries gained, forgotten, and rediscovered. Knowledge is no longer a permanent ascent but a fragile flame, flickering, sputtering, easily extinguished. This shift is itself the reward. It humbles us. It reminds us that our mastery of the spark is not guaranteed, not eternal, but contingent. That we may not be the first to stumble upon the current, nor the last to lose it. The Baghdad Battery becomes less an artifact and more a symbol. A reminder that human ingenuity transcends time. That in every era, in every civilization, there are minds willing to probe the boundaries of the unknown. That curiosity is not modern, it is eternal. But the reward carries a shadow. For if the ancients truly wielded electricity, why is it gone? Why did it vanish into silence, leaving only jars to haunt us? Perhaps it was too limited, too impractical. Perhaps it was confined to ritual or craft, never scaled to broader use. Or perhaps knowledge itself is more fragile than we admit, vulnerable to the tides of conquest, the fires of war, the slow erosion of time. Still, the spark endures. The reward is not the recovery of a lost technology, but the realization that our understanding of history is incomplete, our narrative fractured. The Baghdad Battery cracks open the possibility that other inventions, other discoveries lie buried beneath the sands, waiting for us to find them. This is the gift of the reward, not proof, but inspiration. Consider the effect on modern minds. Engineers who see in the jar a reflection of their own designs. Historians who feel the uncomfortable tug of anomalies at the edges of their narratives. Philosophers who ponder whether progress is a myth, whether we are but rediscoverers of ancient sparks. The Baghdad Battery becomes a mirror, showing us not only the past but ourselves, our arrogance, our curiosity, our hunger for mystery. The camera lingers on a replica jar, its copper cylinder gleaming faintly under laboratory light. A thin wire extends from the iron rod, leading to a small piece of silver. Slowly, faintly, gold begins to deposit onto its surface. The image dissolves into a Mesopotamian workshop 2,000 years ago, where a craftsman watches the same miracle unfold, his hands steady, his eyes wide. The reward is this connection across time. A continuity of human wonder. A recognition that the spark is universal, timeless, indifferent to the boundaries we impose between past and present. And yet as we hold this reward, as we marvel at the spark of possibility, the journey shifts again. For the path of discovery is never straight. From the reward comes the road back. The realization that what we find in the past does not remain confined to antiquity. It reverberates into the present, reshaping how we see ourselves, how we see science, how we see civilization itself. The reward is awe. The reward is humility. The reward is the haunting realization that the spark has always been there, waiting for us to notice. But awe alone is not enough. For now we must return from antiquity, carrying the spark with us, and confront what it means for our modern world. The Baghdad Battery has given us the spark of possibility. But what shadows does this cast on our own era? The reward has been claimed. We have glimpsed the spark flickering in ancient clay, seen the Baghdad Battery not merely as a vessel of possibility, but as a symbol of lost knowledge. Yet the journey does not end in the past. The road back always leads us home, carrying with it the questions, doubts and revelations unearthed in the inmost cave. For the Baghdad Battery is not just about antiquity. It reverberates into modern science. It forces us to reconsider the very foundations of our narratives. Who discovers? Who remembers? Who is permitted to claim the mantle of innovation? In the textbooks of the West, electricity belongs to Europe. It begins with Thales of Miletus rubbing amber against fur, continues with Benjamin Franklin's kite in the storm, culminates in Alessandro Volta's pile, and ignites the revolution that powers our age. This is the linear story told to children, the story that places Europe at the center of enlightenment. But the Baghdad Battery whispers another possibility. That 2 millennia earlier, in the deserts of Mesopotamia, the same principles were already known. That electricity was not the sole child of modernity, but a flame stumbled upon, kindled, and forgotten long before. This thought unsettles us, not because it diminishes Volta or Franklin, but because it fractures the narrative of inevitability. It suggests that science is not a straight march of progress, but a fragile chain, easily broken. That the genius of humanity is not confined to one age or one culture but scattered across civilizations, sparking and fading like lightning in a storm. And so the road back begins with humility. We must acknowledge that our modern triumphs may not be the first. That the technologies we take for granted may have ancient echoes, faint but undeniable. The Baghdad Battery has already inspired modern experiments. Electrochemists see in its design the same principles that drive today's batteries, from the humble AA, powering a remote, to the lithium-ion cells propelling spacecraft beyond our atmosphere. The simplicity of clay, copper and iron mirrors the complexity of modern chemistry: an anode, a cathode, an electrolyte. Different materials, same idea. The continuity is haunting. Yet the battery also challenges us. For if the ancients discovered the principle, why did it not ignite a revolution in their world? Why did they not build circuits, engines, dynamos? Why did the spark die in the cradle instead of roaring into an industrial age? The road back forces us to confront this uncomfortable truth: that progress is not guaranteed. Knowledge is fragile, easily lost to conquest, war and neglect. In Mesopotamia, empires rose and fell, libraries burned, cities crumbled, priestly secrets died with their keepers. The spark may have been too small, too limited, too tied to ritual to survive the collapse. And so, the knowledge vanished, only to be rediscovered centuries later under different skies. The Baghdad Battery thus becomes both inspiration and warning. Inspiration, because it shows that human curiosity has always pressed against the boundaries of the unknown. Warning, because it shows how easily discovery can be lost. This warning reverberates into our own age. We imagine our civilization as indestructible, our knowledge eternal, our technologies permanent. Yet the Baghdad Battery tells us otherwise. It whispers that we are not immune to forgetting. That our own sparks, if not safeguarded, could vanish into silence just as theirs did. The road back also challenges cultural bias. For too long the story of science has been told as a Western epic, sidelining the contributions of other civilizations. The Baghdad Battery reminds us that innovation is global, timeless, scattered across the map of humanity. That Mesopotamia, Egypt, India, China, all may have kindled sparks we have overlooked or erased.
And so, as we return from the deserts of Iraq, we carry not only curiosity but humility. The recognition that our ancestors, no matter how distant, may have touched forces we think of as uniquely ours. The echoes ripple further still. Engineers see in the Baghdad Battery a lesson in simplicity, that power can be coaxed from the humblest of materials: clay, copper, vinegar, objects available to anyone, in any age. The principle of the battery is universal. The sophistication lies not in the materials, but in the imagination to assemble them. This imagination transcends time. A Parthian artisan and a modern scientist are linked by the same principle, the same spark, the same invisible current. Across 2,000 years, the language of electrons has not changed. The road back reminds us that we are bound to the ancients by more than myth. We are bound by science itself. Yet as the echoes grow louder, so too do the questions. What other sparks lie hidden in history? What other discoveries have been made and lost? The Baghdad Battery is not alone in its anomaly. There are others. The Antikythera mechanism of Greece, a clockwork computer centuries ahead of its time. The Piri Reis map, suggesting knowledge of continents unexplored. The mysteries of Egyptian precision in stone. Each is a fracture in the story of linear progress, a reminder that human ingenuity has always leapt ahead, then vanished into shadow. The Baghdad Battery thus becomes part of a chorus, a symphony of anomalies that sing of forgotten knowledge. The road back is not just about one artifact, it is about what it represents. The possibility that history is more complex, more fractured, more mysterious than we dare to admit. The camera shifts. We see a modern laboratory, wires and glass beakers gleaming under fluorescent light. Scientists test batteries built from rare earth metals, striving to push efficiency higher, longevity further. Then we see the clay jar of Baghdad, sitting silent in its case. The continuity is undeniable. Different ages, different tools, same pursuit. The road back is humbling. It forces us to see our own age not as unique, but as one link in a chain stretching across millennia. It reminds us that genius is not bound to time, that discovery is not the birthright of the modern, but the inheritance of all humanity. But this road is not smooth, for with every echo of ancient knowledge comes a warning that we are as vulnerable to forgetting as they were. Our libraries may be digital, our networks global, but fragility remains. Power grids fail, servers decay. Knowledge stored without redundancy is knowledge that can vanish. The Baghdad Battery stands as a mirror, asking us, will we preserve our sparks, or will they vanish into silence as theirs did? The road back leads us not only to humility, but to responsibility, to safeguard our knowledge, to recognize its fragility, to honor its ancestry. The Baghdad Battery is not just an artifact, it is a call to stewardship. And yet, as we walk this road, we sense that the story is not finished. For in modern times, technology allows us to resurrect what was once silent. CT scans, chemical analyses, computer models, they can peer into the artifact in ways Koenig never could. The echoes of the past are being amplified, and with them, new revelations stir. The road back twists, leading us to a resurrection, not of myth, but of circuits themselves. For what if modern science can breathe life back into the Baghdad Battery, revealing not just what it could do, but what it did? The road back has been walked, carrying echoes of the Baghdad Battery into the modern world. But every return carries with it one final gift: resurrection. For though the jar itself sits silent behind glass, its circuits can be reborn, not through speculation, but through the tools of modern science. The resurrection begins with technology. Where Wilhelm Koenig had only his eyes and imagination, today we have machines that can peer into the very bones of artifacts. CT scanners slice through clay without shattering it, revealing the hidden contours of corrosion, the delicate voids where liquid once flowed. Chemical analysis identifies the residues clinging stubbornly to copper and iron, tiny ghosts of ancient electrolytes. Even the molecular traces speak, whispering of acids long dried, of solutions once poured into vessels whose purpose still haunts us. And what do these whispers reveal? Corrosion consistent with electrochemical activity, copper etched and pitted in ways suggestive of acidic contact, iron rods scarred where current might have flowed. The evidence is circumstantial, yes, but it accumulates like sediment, layer upon layer, until the silence of skepticism is harder to maintain. In laboratories across the world, researchers have resurrected the jar, not only as replicas, but as arrays. For while a single vessel produces only a faint current, multiple jars linked together can generate enough electricity to shock visibly, to illuminate small filaments, to prove that the principle scales. 10 jars, 20 jars, suddenly sparks leap in the dark, arcs of light bridging air, crackling where none should be. The Baghdad Battery is reborn, not as a singular oddity, but as the seed of a potential system. A primitive circuit, an array of clay cells producing a chorus of currents. And here, speculation deepens into awe. What if the ancients knew this? What if they too discovered that one jar was not enough, but many together could amplify the spark? Could there once have been workshops or temples where rows of jars stood hidden from sight, their combined currents powering rituals or crafts now lost? The resurrection is not merely technical, it is philosophical. For to bring the Baghdad Battery back to life is to resurrect the minds of those who may have first conceived it, to feel the same wonder, the same shock, the same realization that clay, copper and iron could harness a force invisible and strange. It is to bridge 2 millennia with a spark. Imagine then the scene. A modern scientist in a dim laboratory, staring at a voltmeter as the needle flicks upward, electricity flowing from replicas of ancient jars. The light reflects in their eyes as they whisper, "It works." Cut to a Parthian craftsman 2,000 years earlier, pouring wine into a clay vessel, watching as gold slowly plates a pendant. The same wonder, the same revelation, the same resurrection of possibility. Modern simulations deepen the vision further. Computer models show how multi-cell arrays could be arranged, how voltages could be stabilized, how currents could be harnessed in ways beyond mere plating. Engineers speculate on uses: rudimentary galvanization, mild electrotherapy, ritual sparks. The scenarios multiply, each one plausible, each one a thread in the tapestry of what might have been. The resurrection also reawakens the debates. Skeptics continue to insist that without wires, without direct evidence, the jars cannot be considered true batteries. But the resurrected circuits argue otherwise. They show that the principle is sound, the current real, the potential undeniable. Silence, once the skeptic's ally, is now their prison. For every modern spark flickering from a replica is a reminder that the Baghdad Battery cannot be dismissed as inert. And so, the artifact rises again, not literally, but symbolically. From obscurity in a museum case, it becomes alive once more in the minds of scientists, philosophers, and dreamers. Its circuits are revived, its potential reimagined, its spark rekindled. The resurrection forces us to confront a deeper question. If we can breathe life into this artifact with our tools, might we also resurrect lost knowledge more broadly? Might CT scans, chemical analyses, and digital simulations uncover forgotten technologies buried in other anomalies? The Baghdad Battery becomes not only a symbol of what was lost, but a model for how the past can be reawakened. It is no longer just a jar, it is a circuit revived. Yet resurrection comes with weight. For once the current flows again, once the artifact proves itself capable, we are left with a haunting responsibility. If the ancients knew the spark, why did they not carry it forward? Did they lack the infrastructure? Did they fail to grasp its potential? Or did they choose to confine it, to hide it, to wield it, not for progress, but for power, ritual, and awe? The resurrected battery does not answer these questions. It only amplifies them. The current flows, but the meaning remains elusive. Still, the resurrection transforms the journey. Where once we stood before silence, we now stand before a chorus of sparks. Where once the artifact mocked us with ambiguity, it now dazzles us with possibility. The Baghdad Battery, reborn in modern hands, reminds us that history is not fixed. It is alive, waiting to be revived, reinterpreted, reimagined. Picture it now, a row of resurrected jars glowing faintly with sparks under laboratory light. The hum of current fills the air. The camera closes in on a single clay vessel, ancient and fragile, yet alive again with electricity. A relic resurrected not as an inert curiosity, but as a living mystery, and in this resurrection lies a demand, for when the dead are brought back to life, they ask questions of the living. The Baghdad Battery now asks us, what truths will we resurrect from history's shadows? What knowledge lies dormant, waiting for our tools to awaken it? And what does it mean if the ancients knew more than we dare to believe? The resurrection is not the end, it is a summons. A spark rekindled demands reckoning. The Baghdad Battery has been revived. Its circuits hum once more. But what truths does this resurrection force us to confront about ourselves, our history, and our fragile grasp on knowledge? Every hero's journey returns with an elixir. In myth, it is the golden fleece, the philosopher's stone, the holy grail, an object of power that transforms not just the seeker but the world they return to. Yet in the case of the Baghdad Battery, the elixir is not knowledge fully grasped. It is not certainty bottled and preserved. It is something darker, subtler, and more unsettling. The elixir is doubt, for doubt properly held is its own form of wisdom. The resurrection of the Baghdad Battery proves that electricity can flow from clay and copper, that the principles of galvanic cells existed in the ancient world, whether by design or coincidence. But it does not prove what the ancients did with this power. That gap, that silence, remains unbroken, and so the elixir we carry back into our own time is not a revelation of use, but a gnawing uncertainty about history itself.
The doubt is transformative because it forces us to abandon the comforting illusion of inevitability. For centuries, we have told ourselves a story of progress, a straight line climbing ever upward from ignorance to enlightenment. But the Baghdad Battery fractures that story. It suggests that progress is fragile, that knowledge is not a staircase but a wheel, turning, breaking, turning again. The elixir of doubt teaches us humility. It whispers that perhaps we are not the first to command the spark, that perhaps others discovered it long ago, only to lose it, leaving us to stumble across it once more. It forces us to admit that history is not as secure, not as linear, not as complete as we imagine. Consider the implications. If the Baghdad Battery represents a lost technology, how many others have vanished? What inventions, what ideas, what insights lie buried in sand and ash, erased by conquest, time and forgetfulness? If electricity itself could flicker in antiquity only to vanish, what else might have come and gone, unrecorded, unremembered? This doubt is not paralysis. It is possibility. For every absence in history is a space where wonder can grow. The Baghdad Battery becomes not just an artifact, but a key to questions unasked. Did civilizations rise higher than we know only to fall into silence? Did they guard their knowledge as secrets of priesthoods, never meant for the common hand? Or did they, like us, stumble, experiment, glimpse power, and then lose it in the chaos of collapse? The elixir of doubt transforms how we look at every artifact, every ruin, every anomaly. It sharpens the eye to patterns we may have dismissed. It compels us to look again at the Antikythera mechanism, at the precision of the Great Pyramid, at the lost civilizations whispered in myth. What else have we misread because we could not imagine their knowledge exceeding our expectations? This is the true gift of the Baghdad Battery, not the certainty of what it was, but the doubt it casts upon everything we think we know. And doubt, paradoxically, is power. For doubt opens doors that certainty would keep closed. Doubt pushes us to search, to question, to test, to never accept the surface as final. The Baghdad Battery does not resolve into truth. It lingers in ambiguity, compelling us to look deeper, to ask harder questions, to wrestle with the possibility that the past is stranger, richer, and more intelligent than we allow. Imagine walking through the halls of the museum in Baghdad where the artifact resides. To most, it is another jar, unremarkable, passed by without notice. But to those who know, it is a dagger thrust into the heart of certainty. To stand before it is to feel the weight of forgotten epochs pressing down, to sense the absence of explanation as a presence in itself. The elixir of doubt follows you out of the museum, into the streets lit by neon and humming with electricity. It whispers that these lights, this power, this mastery may not be as unprecedented as we believe. That others may have walked this path before, stumbled into the spark, only to let it die. And that we too might one day join them in forgetting. This doubt is not meant to diminish. It is meant to awaken. For the greatest danger is not that the Baghdad Battery is misunderstood, it is that it is ignored. That we bury it in skepticism's grave, dismiss it as coincidence, and refuse to wrestle with its implications. Doubt keeps the artifact alive. Doubt keeps the questions burning. Doubt is the elixir that prevents complacency. And so, as we return from antiquity into our own world, we carry not proof, but paradox. Not certainty, but a challenge. To accept that the boundaries of history are porous, that the story of progress is fragile, that the line between myth and science is thinner than we dare admit. The Baghdad Battery has given us this gift, a crack in the mirror of history. And through that crack, we see not only the past but ourselves, our hunger for certainty, our fear of ambiguity, our arrogance in assuming we are the pinnacle of discovery. The elixir of doubt transforms us because it forces us to look again. To question what we have taken for granted. To search for the sparks we may have overlooked. To recognize that history is not dead, but alive with mysteries still waiting to be uncovered. Picture it. The clay jar once more, small, fragile, sitting in its glass case. To some it is nothing. To others, it is everything. The difference lies not in the object, but in the willingness to doubt. The Baghdad Battery returns with us not as proof, but as provocation. It unsettles, it disturbs, it awakens. It forces us to admit that we do not know as much as we think we do. And that admission, that humility, is the true elixir. The spark remains unresolved. The truth remains hidden. But the doubt endures, reshaping us. And in that reshaping, we are transformed. Yet the journey is not over. For even with the elixir of doubt in hand, trials remain, trials of interpretation, of competing narratives, of shadows that refuse to align. The Baghdad Battery has given us possibility, humility and wonder. But before the story concludes, it will confront us once more with conflicting interpretations, forcing us to choose not certainty, but meaning. The elixir has been claimed, but shadows still linger. Every great journey must pass through one last gauntlet of trials. For the Baghdad Battery, these trials are not tests of voltage or corrosion, but of interpretation. The artifact does not speak. We must speak for it. And in that speaking, we reveal more about ourselves than about the jar itself. For the Baghdad Battery is not only an object, it is a canvas. Onto its cracked clay, scholars, skeptics, dreamers, and visionaries project their own fears and hopes. The result is not clarity, but a shadow play of competing narratives. The first interpretation is the simplest, and perhaps the most suffocating. The jar, say the skeptics, is no battery at all. It is merely a vessel, mundane, unremarkable, designed to hold scrolls, papyri, or sacred texts. The copper cylinder could serve as a protective casing. The bitumen as a seal against time and moisture. In this reading, the Baghdad Battery becomes nothing more than an ancient filing cabinet, stripped of mystery, its spark extinguished. The second interpretation shifts slightly, cloaking the jar in ritual. To some scholars, it was an incense container, a tool of worship. The copper and iron components were not electrodes, but fittings. The corrosion patterns are not evidence of acid, but of time and burial. Here too the spark dies. Not because the jar is mundane, but because it is sacred, an object of smoke and prayer rather than science. These interpretations form the strongest walls of skepticism, fortified by absence. They rely on what is not there. No wires, no diagrams, no inscriptions, no explicit context. And absence, to the cautious, is louder than possibility. But allies of Koenig push back. They point to the undeniable fact that replicas work. That the jar can generate voltage, that its design is not random but deliberate. They argue that while scrolls could be stored in clay, the copper cylinder is too small, too specific, too engineered for such a purpose. They ask, why fashion a copper tube sealed with bitumen unless something more was intended? Why place an iron rod at its center, isolated yet aligned, unless some interaction was desired? The trial intensifies. Some archaeologists introduce yet another interpretation. Medical therapy. They draw parallels to the use of electric fish in Greece and Rome, suggesting that the jar could have provided mild electroshocks for pain relief. The idea is both plausible and poetic. The jar as healer, not just machine. Others insist on metallurgy. They envision Parthian artisans using jars to electroplate jewelry, to coat objects with thin layers of gold or silver. The evidence of Mesopotamian skill in metalwork supports this. To them, the battery was not mystical, but practical. A tool of trade, not of gods. And still others wander into shadows darker still. To them, the jar was ritual technology. A spark delivered at the right moment could inspire awe, submission, faith. Electricity becomes theater, hidden power masquerading as divine will. The jar becomes not just a tool, but a weapon of belief. The interpretations multiply, like mirrors reflecting into infinity. Each has evidence, each has gaps. Each draws from fragments and fills the void with imagination. This is the trial. Not to decide which is right, but to confront the fact that certainty may never be possible. The Baghdad Battery resists resolution. It will not collapse into one interpretation. It remains suspended, flickering between shadows, a paradox given form. And in this paradox lies a deeper truth. For the trials of interpretation are not about the jar, they are about us. They reveal how we handle the unknown. Skeptics cling to absence, unwilling to risk rewriting history. Visionaries embrace possibility, willing to stretch the boundaries of belief. Both are human. Both are flawed. Both are necessary. The Baghdad Battery is a crucible for interpretation, burning away the illusion that history is fixed. It shows us that artifacts are not inert. They are active participants in our imagination, forcing us to wrestle with doubt, belief, and meaning. Picture a scholarly debate in a dim lecture hall. One voice insists, scrolls, nothing more. Another counters, voltage, measurable, undeniable. A third interjects, therapy, ritual, plating, the evidence supports them all. The voices rise, clash, echo. In the middle of the debate, the jar itself sits silent, refusing to resolve, refusing to side with anyone. Its power is not in what it tells us, but in what it forces us to confront. Our hunger for certainty in a world that offers none.
And perhaps this is the ultimate trial, not to find the answer, but to endure the ambiguity, to accept that the Baghdad Battery is both battery and not battery, science and ritual, mundane and miraculous, depending on the lens through which we view it. The shadows multiply, and yet within them a thread emerges. For even in disagreement, even in the clash of interpretations, one truth remains: the Baghdad Battery cannot be dismissed. Whether scroll jar or battery, it has forced us to rethink. It has unsettled our certainties. It has cracked the mirror of history, and in that crack lies illumination. The trials of interpretation then are not failures. They are revelations. They show us that history is alive, contested, unresolved. That meaning is not fixed, but forged in debate. That artifacts live not in their certainty, but in their capacity to disturb. The Baghdad Battery stands as proof that sometimes the greatest power lies not in what we know, but in what we cannot know. That ambiguity itself is a kind of elixir, forcing us to stay curious, stay humble, stay restless. The camera lingers on the jar, lit starkly in shadow. Scholars' voices fade into silence. The object remains unyielding, enigmatic, eternal. Amid trials, one unifying thread emerges: that the purpose may transcend utility, that the Baghdad Battery is not just a question of what it did, but of what it means. For perhaps its true purpose was never about vaults or rituals, scrolls or incense. Perhaps its true purpose is to remind us that human history is deeper, stranger, and more mysterious than we imagine. The trials of interpretation fade, but one last challenge remains. Beyond debate lies illumination, not of answers, but of meaning. The ultimate boon is waiting. At the end of every mythic quest, there lies the boon, the gift wrested from shadows, carried back from the underworld of uncertainty. It is rarely gold, rarely treasure, rarely the object sought at the beginning. More often it is something stranger, more intangible, something that alters the seeker from within. For the Baghdad Battery, the boon is illumination, not of wires sparking with current, not of ancient lamps glowing in ziggurats, not of laboratories proving once and for all its purpose. The boon is something deeper, more unsettling and more enduring. It is a philosophical revelation about the very nature of human curiosity and the stories we weave around it. When we look at the clay jar, enshrined in its quiet case, we see not merely an artifact, we see a mirror that reflects our hunger for knowledge, our resistance to mystery, and our desperation to impose order upon chaos. The jar may or may not have carried current, but it has undeniably carried meaning, flowing across centuries like an invisible charge. Illumination arrives in the recognition that the Baghdad Battery is not about electricity at all. It is about us. It is about our compulsion to seek, to test, to imagine, to wrestle with the unknown. The jar is a cipher, and in decoding it, we decode ourselves. Think of the myths of Sumer, the earliest stories etched into clay not far from where the jar was later found. Tales of gods who brought gifts of knowledge to humanity, Enki gifting wisdom, Inanna descending into the underworld to bring back power. The Baghdad Battery becomes one more link in this chain, one more vessel through which light is wrestled from darkness. Whether literal or symbolic, its spark is the same: illumination. And in this illumination we glimpse a deeper truth. That knowledge is not a line but a cycle. Civilizations rise, discover, experiment, collapse. Fragments are left behind, shards of possibility, seeds buried in sand. We stumble upon them and ask, in awe and in fear, what if they knew more than we think? What if we are not the first? This is the boon, not certainty, but a shift in perspective. To look at history not as a straight ascent but as a spiral, looping through ages, carrying echoes of forgotten brilliance. To admit that our place atop the pyramid of knowledge may be less secure than we imagine. There is illumination, too, in the idea that utility may not have been the point, that perhaps the battery's spark was not meant to power lamps or plate metals, but to awaken awe. Electricity, after all, is not just force, it is spectacle, a crackling spark, a tingling shock, a strange and invisible presence. In a temple or ritual, even a faint current could inspire reverence. The boon is illumination not just of science, but of spirit. The recognition that human beings have always sought to harness mystery, to turn the unseen into the divine. And perhaps that is the most haunting illumination of all, that the Baghdad Battery may never have been about technology in the sense we define it. It may have been about power, not mechanical but social, spiritual, psychological. To command the spark is to command belief. To shock the faithful is to embody the God. The boon forces us to ask, what is the purpose of knowledge? Is it to build, to control, to heal, to dominate, or simply to inspire awe? The Baghdad Battery illuminates not just what the ancients may have done, but why we seek to know at all. Picture the moment in a laboratory when a replica battery glows faintly, a voltmeter needle twitching. To a scientist, it is a data point. To a philosopher, it is a parable. A jar of clay, forgotten for millennia, still capable of producing light. A message from the past, speaking across time. Knowledge is fragile, but never truly lost. This is the boon, the recognition that mystery itself is the greatest power, that the questions unanswered are often more transformative than those resolved, that the Baghdad Battery is not a relic of certainty, but a beacon of curiosity. Illumination also lies in the parallels. The Baghdad Battery, the Antikythera mechanism, the Great Pyramid, the Nazca lines, all artifacts that resist easy explanation, all provoking the same illumination. That the human story is far stranger, far more complex than the neat timelines we teach ourselves. Each anomaly is a crack of light in the wall of certainty. Each forces us to reimagine who we are and who we might have been.
And yet, illumination does not soothe. It unsettles. For to admit that the past may conceal secrets is to admit that the present too is fragile. That one day our own knowledge may be reduced to fragments, our own marvels misunderstood, our own technologies interpreted as ritual or myth. The Baghdad Battery is illumination not just of history, but of destiny. It shows us that we too are temporary, our brilliance vulnerable to erasure.
The boon, then, is humility. The recognition that we are part of a continuum of seekers, not the final culmination of progress. That the ancients may have held sparks we cannot yet comprehend. That we too may one day be mysteries to those who come after us. The Baghdad Battery is a reminder that light is fleeting, that knowledge is fragile, that the line between science and myth is thinner than we imagine. As the camera lingers on the jar, its clay cracked, its copper green with corrosion, the illumination floods the viewer not with answers, but with questions. What else waits beneath the earth, unrecognized? What other sparks lie hidden in shadows? What other fragments might one day illuminate our arrogance, our ignorance, our certainty? This is the ultimate boon, not proof, not resolution, but transformation. A shift in how we see the past, the present, and ourselves. The Baghdad Battery has illuminated the eternal truth that mystery is not weakness but strength, that to dwell in uncertainty is to remain alive, awake, and searching. The boon has been seized, but one final step remains. The hero must return, carrying illumination back into the world of the ordinary. The journey must conclude, not in darkness, but in legacy.
The Baghdad Battery has given us its light, but how we carry it forward, that is the final test.
The journey ends where it began, in the glow of electricity, the hum of modern life, the illusion of certainty. But we return no longer the same, for we have walked through shadows, unearthed enigmas, faced skepticism, endured ambiguity, and carried back an illumination that changes everything. The Baghdad Battery, whether a true vessel of current or an innocent clay jar mistaken for one, has transformed us. Its power lies not in volts, but in vision. It forces us to stand astride two worlds, the ancient and the modern, the certain and the uncertain, the known and the unknowable. To master both is to accept that truth may not lie in resolution but in tension. The jar itself, cracked and corroded, now rests in silence. A museum piece, one artifact among countless others, yet its legacy is immense. It whispers across time that the human story is never finished, never fixed. That technology, discovery and wonder may have risen and fallen long before our own age of circuits and screens, that we are not the first to touch the spark of the unseen, nor will we be the last. Mastery of two worlds means recognizing the paradox. In the modern world, we wield electricity with precision, channeling it through grids, machines, and networks that bind the globe. We believe we have tamed it, conquered it, bent it to our will. In the ancient world, the Baghdad Battery suggests a humbler truth, that even the faintest spark could inspire awe, that the unseen was as much divine as it was practical. Both views are valid, both incomplete. To master them is to hold both in mind, electricity as power and electricity as wonder. The legacy of the Baghdad Battery is not a matter of utility, but of meaning. It asks us to reconsider how we measure the greatness of civilizations. Is it in the towers they built, the conquests they recorded, the inventions they left behind? Or is it in the mysteries that outlive them, the questions that refuse to die, the sparks that endure long after the flame has gone out? In its silence, the Baghdad Battery becomes eternal. It refuses to yield certainty, and in doing so, it achieves something greater. It becomes immortal in doubt. Scholars may argue endlessly, skeptics may dismiss, dreamers may speculate, but all are drawn back to it again and again like moths to a flame that will not go out. This is mastery of two worlds: to live in the modern age while carrying the humility of the ancient, to admit that we know much, yet not all, to accept that history is not a closed book, but an endless palimpsest, written and rewritten, erased and revealed over and over again. The Baghdad Battery is not a relic, it is a challenge, a call to dig deeper, to question harder, to wonder more boldly. It urges us to look at every fragment, every ruin, every artifact with fresh eyes, to never dismiss the possibility that the past may yet surprise us. Its legacy is a spark carried forward, not in copper and iron, but in imagination and inquiry. And what of eternity? Here lies the true mastery, to see ourselves reflected in the clay jar, to recognize that we too are temporary. Our skyscrapers, our satellites, our quantum computers, they may all one day be ruins, misunderstood by distant descendants. Our knowledge, like theirs, may fracture and fade. The Baghdad Battery is a reminder that nothing is permanent, not even power. Yet within this impermanence lies eternity, for the cycle continues. Sparks are lost and found, knowledge dies and is reborn, civilizations rise and fall, but the quest for understanding never ends. The Baghdad Battery is part of that eternal cycle, one spark in an endless chain of light and shadow. To master two worlds is to live with this paradox, that we are both insignificant and essential, fleeting and eternal. That the clay jar of the Parthians may hold as much meaning as the particle accelerators of today. That history's greatest gift is not certainty, but wonder. And so, as the camera pulls back, we leave the museum once more. The streets of Baghdad hum with neon and noise, the modern world alive with power. But in the mind, the clay jar lingers, glowing faintly with the light of questions unanswered. The journey has not given us resolution. It has given us something greater. It has given us perspective. The Baghdad Battery will endure, not as proof, but as provocation. Not as fact, but as possibility. Not as certainty, but as eternal doubt. And in that doubt, we find transformation. This is its legacy, this is its eternity. And so the story closes, not with an ending, but with a question. What other sparks lie buried in the sands of time, waiting to ignite once more? Thank you for joining us on this extraordinary journey through the universe here on Frontiers of Infinity. If this glimpse into the unknown has sparked your curiosity, be sure to subscribe and join us, where we unravel the darkest mysteries of space.